YouTube. Welcome back to Comics, Logic, and Reason. Today I have another episode of Retoric for y'all, and this will be an example of end result thinking, and that being education a pipeline of prison. Now I have to say this probably has to be one of the most idiotic examples of resource rhetoric, but the claim is that these urban inner city schools, they're underfunded. They're not getting the same funding as the white schools, right? As a result of this, they're incapable of properly educating the black students, and they put these kids out here who are unprepared for the real world, and as a result of that, they have to resort to crime to feed themselves. And if they resort to crime, that means that you have high crime rates, and they're much more likely to be arrested and go to jail, and thus education is a result or the cause of this. Okay, now, as always, to the truth. First of all, this whole argument is centered on this idea that the number one issue is funding. Now, as far as the funding goes, there have been studies to show that there are cases in areas where the inner city schools do get less funding than the urban schools, or the rural schools, or the suburban schools. But those very same studies also show that there are certain places where the inner city schools get more funding than these suburban areas. So this whole idea of the funding thing is just a myth. This whole underfunding inner city schools is pretty much a myth. And a perfect example to show how this is how it's not true would be, homeschooling. Homeschooling is the cheapest form of education that exists in America. Yet it outperforms all other types of education. Homeschoolers on average score higher on standardized tests than any other group. They also, when in college, are in less need of remedial classes, in their freshman years. So how are homeschoolers able to do this if it's the cheapest form of education, if it was all about money? Obviously, there have to be something else involved. And if you think about it, if you homeschool, then children are with their parents. If the parents do the homeschooling, which is usually most of the case. And I've been in schools, of course, and there's always the badass kids that act up in school, right? And then their parents show up and they're completely different. Some of them turn into perfect little angels. So obviously, and we know this to a certain extent, this is all children. They will act differently when around their parents than when not around their parents. So then that brings us to discipline. If you're homeschooling your children and you're there with your children, obviously they're going to be much more disciplined and on much better behavior around their parents. Now obviously there are going to be other issues involved because the parents, since they're homeschooled, then they're probably a lot able to give their children more personal attention than the teacher with 30 students in the classroom can. But if you're a teacher, I've seen interviews from teachers who explained or said why they stopped teaching in urban inner city schools. Right? I've seen different videos, many different videos and interviews, having heard one teacher say that they stopped teaching in inner city schools because of the lack of funding. Just about each and every one of them says it's all about the discipline and having to deal with these badass kids. These kids attacking the students. If they're in junior high or high school, they're attacking the students. Teachers fear for their lives. Saying that there's this old saying, it takes one bad apple to spoil a bunch. But if it just takes one bad apple to spoil a bunch, well then, what about a bunch of bad apples? That bunch don't have a chance. And that's really the case. And you have these teachers in these classrooms who's trying to teach a lesson plan. They have to be the teacher. They have to be the disciplinarian. They have to be the counselor, which gets in the way of them teaching. And they'll go to the principal, the school board ask, to have these children removed, and well, that's politically incorrect. They're going to say, well, we need to keep them in school where they have, because we can't have them out on the street, even though they are disrupting classrooms. But one of the biggest issues with urban inner city schools is these badass kids. And I've heard different black folks say, and a lot of these brainwashed blacks who are always crying about race all the time, and the white man this, the white man that, but I've heard many of them say, I want my kids to go to school, these little white kids, instead of the black kids, these badass black kids, right? For good reason. Another issue that that they won't discuss, or the race hustlers won't discuss, is this idea of children learning. There's this idea that the children start learning when they get to the classroom, but in reality, children start learning long before they set foot in the classroom. I mean, these children start learning before they're one, before they can start walking. They're learning. So the question is, what are they learning? Again, are they learning decent behavior? I mean, they act like civilized human beings, or are they being raised in a bunch of ghetto nonsense, that ghetto destructive nonsense? Well, it's safe to say that in these inner city schools, in the urban areas, in the hood, where the ghetto mentalities are prevalent, and they grew up around that nonsense, well, the likelihood of them being taught all that ghetto nonsense is going to be greater than children growing up in two-parent households in, say, suburban areas. So that ghetto mentality is also a problem, which is really the source of the badass black kid. These badass kids in these schools that's disrupting the classroom. But anyway, so it has nothing at all to do with education. Education is not a pipeline of prison. Because if that's the case, when we have a bunch of people in prison with PhDs and doctors and master's degrees, if education was the pathway to prison, that's stupid. There's absolutely no evidence whatsoever linking education to prison. So what's the real problem? Well, broken homes, broken families, and a lack of fathers. Okay, we have a ton of evidence showing that the correlation between broken homes and a lack of fathers in prison. Something like 85% of all children in correction facilities come from single-parent households without fathers. A good bulk, something like 2/3 plus of all our prison inmates come from single-parent households without fathers. So obviously there's more of a link to broken homes and broken families than there is education. So then why are we blaming on education? Well, because it fits the race narrative. You can say that it's racism if we say that it's education that's a pipeline of prison. But if you say that parenting, which is a real pipeline of prison, then they can't cry racism because we're doing it ourselves. So that's just the basis of race hustle rhetoric. Rhetoric is to blame the white man and racism for everything. They deflect away any personal possibility, and that's figure out some type of way to pay everything on the white man. But anyway, if you ever hear that nonsense of education is a pipeline of prison, well, now you know, and knowing is half the battle. And as always, y'all, until next time.